Yiboneh, Yiboneh Hamikdash, Yitzion, Yitzion, Yitzion Temane. Yiboneh, Yiboneh, Yiboneh Hamikdash, Yitzion, Yitzion, Yitzion Temane. Neshama shir chadash.
Shalom Aleichem, everybody. Welcome back to the Yiboneh Beit Midrash. A warm welcome home to Torah. We have people online all over the world, in the Eastern Hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere. And Baruch Hashem, we have people in the Beit Midrash. Inclement weather, which we have been praying for. And these are, I guess, I'm going to call the late rains, right? In the Shema, we have the early rains and the late rains. For those who are not familiar with what we do here, we use the Yakar to introduce the discussion on the Parsha of the week. If you would like to be part of our online group or to receive the English source sheets, send me an email. It should be in the description below. And before we begin, I want to dedicate tonight's learning to the Refuah Shalema of Yechiel Aryeh ben Ruth. Should have Refuah Shalema of Zrat Hashem. I think also our learning should be for the Chayalim and for all of Am Yisrael. We should be protected through our Torah learning. Okay, so let us begin. Oh, also I want to mention that we use Hebrew sheets. We translate everything, so don't be afraid. However, it would be really good if you guys joined, basically downloaded or went to the website and you can see the Hebrew sheets so that you could follow along and perhaps even learn some Hebrew along the way. So we're in Parshas Vayakhel. We use one verse. We could talk about one verse and it's only an hour, but trust me, we could talk for weeks, months, infinite amount of time on one verse. But we will discuss this verse that says that the princes brought the shoham stones as well as the filling stones, and it was to be used for the Kohen and the Kohen Gadol's, the ephod and the choshen, which was unique to the Kohen Gadol, to the high priest. The Hebrew is v'hanesiim heviu es avnei shoham ve'es avnei hamiluim le'ephod v'lechoshen. Now, what should strike you immediately is the word v'hanesiim is spelled without a yud. See, if you go and check out other places, for example, in Numbers chapter 7, verse 10, or Numbers 10, verse 4, right? The word Nesim appears. Sometimes it's with just one yud, sometimes it's with two yuds. However, here, the word Nesim has no yuds, right? There's not one, there's not two, there's no yuds. And Rashi brings, let's look at Rashi before we enter the Yakar's explanation. Rashi says, Rabbi Nosson says, what promoted the princes to donate for the dedication? Now, in Parshas Naso, we're very familiar with the gifts that the 12 tribal leaders, the princes, brought. When do we read that parsha, especially besides in Parshas Naso? On Hanukkah, right? So this was the Chanukah HaMizbeach, the dedication of the altar. And they came forward. They came first. They came only. They represented their tribes, but they came willingly and they came first. So they were not at all hesitant, lazy. We're going to come up with some other interesting words as we go along. But in Hebrew, as the Yakar mentions, a certain word, which I will, shenit rashlu. Okay, it's the first word. It's the second line down. You have the right page. Second line down on the Yakar. It's the last word. Here, this word here. Okay, they had rashlanut, which is, if you look up in the dictionary, it's like weak. It's procrastination. It's hesitation, okay? But in the meantime, why was it, Rashi is explaining, why was it they went forward to donate for the Mizbeach and the tabernacle, but when it came to for the altar, but when it came to the tabernacle, they were hesitant? That's what we're reading in Rashi. Rav Nosson said what prompted them to donate for the dedication of the altar first, before all the other Israelites, while in contrast, they did not donate first for the work of the Mishkan. They came last. They donated last. So this is what Rashi is explaining, and it's of course based on ancient Jewish texts. This is what the princes said. Let the community donate what they will donate, and you know what? Whatever they're missing, we will complete it. Now, to me, I would have read that and I would not have thought anything negative. In fact, I have contributors, and I want to thank them, that whenever we make a campaign and we're a few $1,000s short, at the very end, they come through. I think that's great, and I have no complaints, and I'm almost kind of relying on them. Every time they come through. I forget in baseball, there must be a term, right? They come through. Well, apparently this is considered arrogant, as we will see the Yakar describes them. So, since the community completed everything, as we see in verse 7 of chapter 36, it says, "V'malacha hayas that the work was sufficient. So what did the princes say? Oh, what are we going to do? So they went ahead and brought these stones. Okay. Now, Rashi also says, since at first they were lazy. Now, that is not a good thing. You cannot say being lazy is a good thing. They didn't immediately donate, and not only that, that's the reason there's no yud in the name of Nisim, of their title. This sounds like it's a punishment or some kind of teaching that this is incorrect. This is not the correct way. That's as far as Rashi goes. Let's see what the Yakar has to say. He says, like this. Amru Chazal, based on the verse, the Nisim brought the Avnei Shoham. He brings down from the Midrash Rabbah, which I also have as source number 2, but let's just see what he says here. Lefi shenit rashlu b'nedavazu, because they were indolent, they were procrastinators, because they were lazy in bringing these donations. Lo haviyu nedavatam ki'im libasof, they only brought their donation at the very end. Al kain, therefore, as a result of this not proper behavior, nechsar os yud mishmam, then the yud was removed. It's missing from their name. V'hanisiim chaser ksiv. As you can see, the Heinun, Shin, Aleph, Mem. There's no yud. Ki be'emet lo haya lehem lahamtin ad lebesof. According to the Yakar, it doesn't really make sense. In truth, they didn't really need. They shouldn't have waited till the end. Why? Ki ulai yitnu Yisrael kol hatzorech. What if it was a big risk on their part? What if the Jews brought everything? Then they would be really out of the ballpark, and they couldn't donate. Lo yelem chelik b'kol mishkan. And as a result, if the Israelites brought everything, they wouldn't have any portion in the Mishkan. So we can already see maybe that was like a calculated mistake to think, well, whatever's missing we'll give, because then maybe, at least in the Mishkan, they wouldn't be able to give it all. Of course, when we run a campaign, you can always give, right? But here, it's a certain amount of material, and you don't need anything more than that. And it could be that they would have lost the opportunity. So now why specifically the yud? In other words, what is that trying to teach us? It's very interesting that a yud is missing, but what is it about the yud that is so important for us to know? So he discusses this, the Yakar discusses this in Parashat Truma, 25 verse 2. But he explains over there, Lefisha Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's interesting. God said, and he brings a verse from Tehillim. So what was King David doing? King David, when he wrote or authored or compiled Tehillim, it was based on Ruach HaKodesh. He's not listed amongst the prophets, but he had a level of Ruach HaKodesh that he understood what God's will was, and God's will never changes. It always was. So he was in tune with what we call the oral Torah. He knew the Masorah of what was, is, and will be. So he was able to say these words. In Psalms 101, verse 5, I'm going to get back to the Midrash Rabbah in a second. It says in source number 3, Psalms 101, verse 5, at the end, one whose eyes are raised up on high and his heart is expansive, I cannot tolerate him. In Hebrew, Geva einayim urchav levov oto lo chal. Someone whose eyes are raised up, right? We're talking about a haughtiness, and an expansive heart. Again, another adjective or description of someone who's arrogant. Him, God says, I cannot tolerate. David knew this, of course. And the Yakar says, in his own words, the Eitzel HaNesi'im Hayes Bli Safek Ruach Gava. Right? Regarding or by these princes, there was without any doubt a ruach of gava, a certain spirit of haughtiness. Bi'amram derech hit arut. They said in a way, in a boastful way, the hit pa'er, like self-aggrandizement, a boastful manner. Miyamale masha naknu mechasrim. Maybe as if they're always the ones that fill the gap. That they have the wealth and they feel they can be the ones who always give. Therefore, it sounds very haughty. Who else is going to fulfill whatever is missing? Aval anachnu mimali'im kol ma shehatzibur mechasrim. We're the ones who are always going to come to the aid of the congregation. Listen, everyone has to know their own talents. There's no question about it. And some of us are very talented. But those talents are God-given talents. Okay? I don't think we should own those talents. If God gave us, there's certain ownership because it's ours, and we should use them wisely, but not in an arrogant way. Al kain lokach HaKadosh Baruch Hu mishmam os yud. And according to the Yakar, this is the very reason that God removed the yud from their name, because why? It's rak os zeh. It's particularly the yud, this particular letter, min Hashem hagadol. That's one of the four, well, it's really three letters, right? Yud, Hey, and Vav. Obviously there's another Hey, but there's three letters in God's name, and the Yud is one of them, and therefore Hashem removed it. Ki ze min Hashem hagadol haya chakuk bishmam, because it's the Yud that's engraved or inscribed in their name. V'oto lakach Hashem mehem, and it was that letter that Hashem took from them by saying, what was God's message to them? Ein kam makomo. It's not the place for my name amongst the haughty. Right? Teaches us a lot how humble we should be. So the Yakar says, V'nocha lo mar'od. We're actually able to say even further, Lefi shekol hamishkan haya kapara al masa ha'egel. Now, let me just give you some background. There is a difference of opinion between Rashi and the Ramban, meaning they are carrying on a tradition that they heard. Okay, they didn't make it up. So we have one tradition according to Rashi that the Mishkan came specifically, the command and the need for a Mishkan came as a result of the sin of the golden calf. Therefore, it's serving as an atonement. Whereas the Ramban is holding, and it's kind of easier to understand the Ramban in a certain sense, he's holding that the way the world, like we know, God looked into the Torah, and created the world. So the Torah existed before the world did. So the Torah we have always was, and there was always going to be a Mishkan. So in order to somehow, let's say, resolve this particular issue, I would like to suggest that just like we ask, who wrote the last 8 verses of the Torah? So there's an argument. The Torah says that Moses wrote every word, and yet he's also an honest broker, right? He doesn't lie. And yet God told him to write that he died. How could he do that if he was still alive? So there's a big question. Who wrote Moses died? Could Moses have written it? And there's another opinion that Joshua wrote the last 8 verses. So I'd like to suggest, and it's not my suggestion, but I think it's the Vilna Gaon mentions it, maybe others. Moses did write the whole Torah, but the spaces weren't given for the last 8 verses. So he wrote it, but it didn't have meaning, that he died. And it was Joshua that was told how to separate those words to have meaning, because you don't have meaning when you don't have spaces. So that really resolves this issue over there, with who wrote the last 8 verses. Moses wrote them, true, but it didn't have the same meaning until Joshua separated them. So who wrote the last 8 verses? One says Joshua, one says Moses, and we have no problem, because they both did. Okay, maybe the same thing here. It could be that those 5 whole chapters dealing with the Mishkan, and believe me, that's just the 5 chapters here. Then you have the rest of the Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy dealing with the Mishkan. It could have been very different had we never sinned with the golden calf, according to Rashi. Okay, that's how, at least for me, I can somehow resolve it in my head. But some arguments can never be resolved. But I think it's our job to figure out how to resolve. Sometimes it's just a different perspective. It's just my opinion. Let's go on. So we're now discussing this idea that the whole Mishkan, remember, according to Rashi, acts as an atonement for the sin of the golden calf. And what happened as a result of the sin of the golden calf? Shegaram shvirat haluchos. That led or caused the tablets to be broken. Right? Moses comes down, sees the golden calf. There's going to be 2 different ways to look at it. He became angry. He went ahead and he intentionally broke the tablets. And Hashem said, Yasher Koach, because that's a good thing. He didn't ask Hashem. He did what he thought Hashem would have wanted, and Hashem said, yeah, good thing. Because the luchos, these tablets, were like, shall I say, kedushin, erusin, a betrothal to the Jewish people. And if we were involved in what we call idolatry, and idolatry and adultery are actually synonymous with each other. There's 2 tablets. There's 5 commandments on each tablet. And if you take a look, 1 is parallel to 6, 2 is parallel to 7. And in this case, 2, which is do not commit idolatry, and number 7 is do not commit adultery. And we're not going to go into how all 5 match the other 5, but trust me, we've discussed it before, we will discuss it again. Here's just not the place. So as a result of Moses' initiation to destroy the tablets, that saved us from being what we would call Eishasish, already married to God, and at the same time committing adultery through idolatry. However, we're going to take a different aspect now, that the letters flew off the tablets, and they were what was holding up the tablets in Moses' hands. And as a result of those letters flying off, they became too heavy, and Moses had to drop them. Okay, we're going to take that view, and we'll see it right now. As it says, Shegaram shvirat haluchos, the osios kedoshos porchos. And as a result, the letters, the holy letters, flew off. The Yidua. Now this is something that he claims you must know. That what? Sha'osios yesh behem yoter kedusha min haluchos. That if you weigh it out, so to speak, that this sapphire stone tablet had engraving, the engraving itself was holier than the outer edges of the letters. Okay? That's what we have to assume. And this is what he says you should know. Al kain heviu kol ha'am l'nedava shlosha dvarim ha'amurim parshas truma. As well, there is an opinion. There's 15 items, but let's just go with the main opinion. There were 13 types of material that needed to be brought for the construction of the tabernacle, and the whole people, they brought as a gift 13 different types of material that's discussed in Parshas Truma. L'chaper al shegarmu prichata osios haluchos, and that was coming. The 13 ingredients that the people brought were coming to atone for the causing of the letters that flew off the tablets. Hanidrashim b'shalosh esrei midos shahatorah nidrasha behem. As everyone knows, if you arrive in shul early enough, that the Rabbi Yishmael, the Bryce of Rabbi Yishmael, the 13 hermeneutical principles, which I like to call exegesis. I get to use the word in a holy way, right? It's a funny way. So there are 13 hermeneutical principles in which we darshan out the Torah. The Torah cannot be understood without these 13 principles that we did receive on Har Sinai, and those 13 principles are a way to understand the Torah. So that's why the people are bringing the 13 ingredients. But the Nesiim, lo ayu Nesiim yicholim lahavi od shum davar nidava hamityaches el katav haluchos shuhu ikar. And for some reason, these princes, they were actually not able to bring, and therefore find any kapara, by bringing anything that could relate to the actual writing of the luchos, which we claim is the ikar itself, meaning the letters. What they're going to end up bringing is something, the two stones that relate to the two tablets. So it could be they needed less kapara, or they lost out on the higher level of kapara. I don't know how to read it, but there, according to the Yakar, the people found kapara through the 13 ingredients because of the 13 hermeneutical principles in which we understand the Torah, whereas the Nesiim lost out on that. V'hutzruchu lahavi shtei avnei shoham lekapara al shvirat shtei avnei haluchos. However, they were required to bring stones. They brought the two stones, each tribe, to atone for the breaking of the actual tablets themselves, which there were two of. The kapara zu eina chashuva kamo kapara sa'am. However, the way the Yakar is expressing it is that their atonement was not as high of level. Chashuva wasn't as important as the atonement for the people. I think that's because they lost out, because of their arrogance. Al nechsar os yud mishmam. Again, going back to the idea that the yud is missing from their title, from their names. Ki lo haya chelek lehem ba'oto kapara. Therefore, what happened was they didn't actually have a portion in the atonement, habo aktav yud hadibros, that is coming because what we have 10, we call them 10 commandments, but there were 10 dibros, there were 10 statements, 10 mamaros, 10 statements, Esra dibros. Dahainu osios haporachot, meaning that, remember, those letters all flew away. So the way I understand this paragraph is that the Nesiim were not zocha for some reason to the same level of kapara as the rest of the people. Us, we gave the 13 ingredients, materials, and therefore we were zoche to a higher level of kapara for the letters, and seemingly the yud, representing the Esser Dibros, it was lacking. They did not get that type of kapara, but they did find a kapara, at least for the breaking of the actual tablets themselves. Before we go to the next paragraph, I think it's worthwhile to see with our own eyes, source number 2, the Midrash Rabbah in Bamidbar, and it's number 2 on the source sheet. It's quite long, but I think it's worth trying to understand what was happening with these princes. So the princes of Israel, we know they brought the offerings in Parshas Naso, right? And that's in chapter 7 of Numbers. So the question was in the Medrash, why did the princes rush to come and sacrifice first? But when it came for the labor of the tabernacle, they were reluctant, they were indolent, and brought only the onyx stones and other stones for setting last. They brought that last. It is because when Moses said, anyone who is generous of heart shall bring the gift of the Lord for the labor of the tabernacle, apparently he did not say it to the princes. So on that level, if he didn't say it to the princes, I don't know how much guilt they should have. But maybe they should have come forward. And they were displeased that he didn't tell them to bring them. So what did they say to each other? You know what, let the people bring what they'll bring, and we'll complete what is lacking. And all of the Jewish people rejoiced over the labor of the tabernacle, joyfully brought every donation enthusiastically. Well, they were not included in this enthusiasm and joy of bringing. It even says in Exodus 35:22, V'yavohu ha'anashim al hanashim kol nediv leiv, that everyone came, the men and the women, man, everybody came. It was like if you ever had a fundraiser, this was it. Because within 2 days, they were finished. 2 or 3 days, they had more than enough. They had to stop the people. And they would crowd each other. The men and the women would come in a muddled throng. In 2 mornings, we'll see the verse, in 2 mornings, meaning in 2 days, they brought all the donations. It says in Exodus 36:3, and they brought more donations, morning after morning. Vehem heviu olav od nedava baboker. Why is baboker said? We'll see another reason why shortly. And, of course, then it says the material was sufficient, which we saw. Dayam, it was enough. V'malacha haya dayam. So after 2 days, the princes sought to bring their donation, but they weren't able to do so because it was Shabbos or because they already collected all they needed, right? As it says in Exodus 36, verse 6. You can see in source number 11. It says, so the people stopped bringing. And number 11 on the source sheet. Moses commanded, and they announced in the camp, let no man or woman do any more work for the offering for the holy. So the people stopped bringing. By the way, I mentioned before that it's Shabbos. Why? Because it says, Lo yasu od malacha. This is one of the ways we know that carrying outside is a malacha. You wouldn't have thought it's a malacha, right? But carrying from one reshus, one domain to another domain, is forbidden. It's actually called a malacha. And the people were told to stop. Again, because it was Shabbos, and again, because they really had collected everything they needed. So the Medrash continues. So at this point, the princes were lamenting, and the fact that they didn't have the privilege of participating in the donations for the tabernacle. They said, since we didn't have the privilege of participating in the donations for the tabernacle, we'll give to donate the vestments of the high priests. See, it's a little bit of a different subject matter, right? You have for the tabernacle, then you have for the high priests, for the garments of the high priests. And that's what's written. See in chapter 35, verse 27. This is our verse. The princes bought the onyx stones and the stones for the setting for the ephod and the breastplate. That's right. There's a regular Kohen has 4 garments. It's all white and it's cotton. And then you have linen. And then you have the And then you have the high priest, which is 8 garments. And 2 are mentioned here, the ephod and the breastplate. Now the Holy One, blessed be He, said, regarding my children who were alactorous, meaning they were enthusiastic and they were quick, it will be written that they brought, and there was more than enough. The princes, however, in Hanasi'im, which is missing the Yud, they were indolent. He removed 1 letter from their title, the Hanasi'im. It's written without a Yud. Now, once the tabernacle was completed, they came early and brought an offering with alacrity. So they did come first within Parshas Naso. And that's what's written, the princes of Israel brought. They said, this is the time to sacrifice offerings joyfully, as the divine presence rested upon our handiwork. Once the tabernacle was crafted and nothing was lacking, they said, oh, what can we bring? They went and brought the carts, right? There were wagons in which they could carry the tabernacle. Now, keep in mind, you had 3 Kohanic families who were responsible for the transportation, transporting the tabernacle from one place to another. So it's really in their interest to bring the carts. I mean, this stuff was pretty heavy. Some of it was really heavy. We do know that the actual ark itself carried those who carried it, but that wasn't true with the other ingredients or materials. So who gave them the counsel about the carts, perhaps? It was the tribe of Yisachar. I lost my place. It was the tribe of Yisachar. And this is what the tribe of Yisachar said to them. Does the tabernacle that you crafted float in the air? Well, like I mentioned, only the ark did. Rather, pledge carts upon which you could carry it. And that's why it actually says the princes of Israel brought. They brought. The whole idea of bringing and moving and transporting is done through the carts. But this shows you that they had regretted what they had done initially by not bringing. Okay, so now let's begin the next paragraph. And we're going to quote a Gemara from Yuma, which we will also see. It says, Darshu Hanasi'im Hevi'u. Right? Again, there's no Yud. So the princes brought. Now the Yakar is going to tell us that it doesn't just mean princes. When we see that word, we think princes. And nothing wrong with that. But he's going to help us open our minds, expand our minds, that actually the word also means the clouds. And you can see this in Proverbs chapter 25, verse 14, which is number 8 on the source sheet. It clearly means clouds. Clouds and wind. It could mean vapor. But Nesi'im v'ruach, the Geshem, right? The clouds and the wind. The Geshem ein. There was no rain. Ish mithalel b'matat sheker. So is a man who boasts with a false gift. Now, he's taking us on a journey because we're going to find out that if somebody makes a pledge to donate and doesn't fulfill their pledge, that is going to hold back the rain. And this seemingly hinted the Nesim should have come forward and brought their gifts. They didn't. But let's see what the Yakar has to say. Right away, he mentions that it's actually, maybe we should go to Yuma 75. It's number 7 on the source sheet. With regard to donations for the tabernacle, the verse says, and they brought yet to him freewill offerings, boker b'boker, every morning. The Gemara asks, what does it mean, boker b'boker, every morning? Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani said, in the name of Rabbi Yonatan, they brought donations, ready for this? I would say drum roll, please. They brought donations from that which fell every morning. What fell every morning? The man. So imagine you go to get your man, and something was with the man that was of value, that you could give. This teaches that pearls and precious stones fell for the Israelites with the manna. Now, what did you need? We were just accumulating wealth because we were living rent-free. We didn't have to buy new Nikes or new shoes. We didn't have to change our socks. We had no laundry to do. We didn't sweat, right? We didn't even go to the bathroom. No, you didn't have to buy toilet paper. You didn't have to buy any food, right? And so every day we were in the desert, we got richer and richer because wealth was coming down with the manna. Pearls and precious stones came with the manna. And how do we know? Wait till you hear this. We know that the Nisi'im brought these stones. But the word Nisi'im doesn't mean priests, or doesn't mean the clouds that brought the manna. Right? And the rulers, Nisi'im, brought the onyx stones. So Atana taught that the word Nisi'im actually means clouds. The clouds brought the stones. As it says, and that's the verse we just read in Proverbs 25:14. As clouds, we called Nisi'im v'ruach ein geshem. There was no rain, right? But there's a problem. So is he that boasts himself as a false gift. What is the bottom line? We learn from this that the precious stones fell from the clouds with the manna. Okay, let's go see the Yakar, what he's telling us, because he's brought down this idea that Nisim brought, but it's a language of anonim, clouds, and then he brought the verse Nisim Ruach, which we just saw in Mishlei. Amru sha'anonim heviu avnei shoam, that it was the clouds themselves that brought these precious stones. V'nira lefaresh al derech amru chazal. Now, he's going to take us on a journey to the Gemara in Tainus 8b. Look at number 9 on the source sheet. It's quoting the same verse we just saw, right, in the Proverbs 25:14. Rav Yochanan further said that rain is withheld. Why, God forbid, should rain be withheld? Only due to those who pledge charity in public, but do not give. These Nisim, right, they're like everyone else. They also should have given. As vapors, or let's say clouds, and wind without rain. So is he who boasts of a false gift. A false gift is that idea of making a pledge, but not coming through. That's called a false gift. Rav Yochanan said, what's the meaning of what it means? This is a little bit of a different, but it's tied in. A tithe, shall you tithe, right? There's a double language of maaser. It teaches you, it can be interpreted homiletically. If you take your 1/10, right, you take a certain amount, if you give it, you give the charity, then you will become wealthy in the merit of a mitzvah. So when you make a pledge and you don't give it, the opposite will happen. You'll become with less geshem. Geshem is gashmiut. You won't see the bracha from the physical blessings. That's how I'm reading it. So going back into the Yakar, he's quoting Gemara Tainus, Ein hageshamim netzarim ki al poiskei tzedakah barabim ve'enan noisnim, right? That the geshem only stops on account of those who make these pledges of charity in public, but they don't give, they don't follow through. And the verse in Gemara was Nisim v'ruach the geshem ayin, right? That the word Nisim, it's a play on words, but it really means clouds. And it also means these princes, right? That the clouds and the wind. Now, there's a couple ways to think about it. It literally said in the Gemara that the clouds are going to bring the Shoham stones. And what the Yakar is going to say, or what the Gemara is going to say, is that we all know how the structure for rain works. That there's evaporation off of the seas and the lakes and the rivers, and wherever there's dew, it's going to evaporate. It's going to eventually go to the clouds. The clouds move, and then rain comes. However the cold front and the warm front mix, or maybe the seeding of the clouds to through the airplanes, but eventually it comes down. There's a cycle, okay? So where are these stones? These stones, these precious stones, pearls, right? We know where they're found at the bottom of the seabed. And so too are these stones. So eventually that's how the clouds end up bringing, and I'm only assuming they're smaller particles, of stone. I can't imagine big stones being dropped, but who knows? This is the words as we see them. It says like this. He says, Im Kain, if that's the case, we're talking about a matna sheker, right? Someone who made a pledge but didn't follow through. Makom she'ein noitnim hanadava, a place, a situation where you're not going to give what you pledged, right? So then ein hanesiim moridim klum, then the clouds are not going to draw it down. There's not going to be rain. You're not going to get the wealth from the sky. Avalkan, but here, according to the Yakar, shekol echad natan nidvato, that everyone did give. Then, therefore, hanisim heviu, when it says the princes brought, that's ki hanisim nosnu gishmam bi'itam. That means the clouds did bring the rain in its time. V'hoyesa habrocha mishtalachat b'kol ma'aseh yedehem, meaning that a blessing was sent into their hands for all of their actions. They did the right thing. Adshu koinim avnei shoam, until they were able to purchase the bigger stones. That's how I'm reading it. The kol even yakar ayidei rov oishef sheshpiu lehem hanesiim, that they were actually able to purchase because of the acquisition of the little particles of stone, that they were able, through their great wealth that was showered upon them from above, from the clouds. That's one way. Oh, shayu nesim shoavim hamayim min karkait hayam, or that the clouds themselves drew as a vacuum, so to speak, draw forth from the water from the seabed. Makom sha'avnei shoham mitzuyim sham, the place where these precious stones are found. Now, there's another way, and I'm using my imagination. It could be the wind, right? The whole idea of evaporation coincides with wind. So it could be that there were stones under the seabed, or let's say towards the edge of the shore, and through the wind of evaporation, that they were able to find the large stones there. But that's not what he seems to be saying. He seems to be saying that they were showered down from above, wealth. And again, it's just hard for me to get my head around large stones coming down. That's why I'm assuming that it was smaller particles. That basically increases your own wealth, and therefore it says that they could purchase with them larger stones. That's how I'm reading it. Now we're at the tail end of the Yakar. The outside harem is Yuforash Mash Amru b'Misora. From an aspect of a hint, we can explain what is said over in the tradition. And now the word Misora, if you ever read the Siftei Chachamim and some of the other Meforshim, they use this idea that it is through the oral Torah. Okay, that we have an oral Torah when we have words like Gezerah Shava, one word here, one word there, that there are connections. So twice in the Torah it uses this word Vayakhel. Vayakhel is used the first time in Genesis chapter 8, verse 2. And the springs of the deep were closed, and the windows of the heavens, and the rain from the heavens was withheld, meaning it finished. Okay, Vayakhel. It finished. There was no more rains. This was by the flood, chapter 8 of Genesis. And the second time it's used is in our parsha, V'kalei ha'am mehevi, right? The people stopped bringing. Again, the same word, Vayakhel. This is the Masor, Masor meaning that there's a connection. So what does this hint to? It hints shebizman she'ena noisni nidvatam, that in a place where someone made a public pledge and they didn't fulfill it. They didn't give what they were supposed to give. V'yikalei mehevi. So that's the first part. And the second is that the people stopped bringing et masha nidvo. Exactly. So they stopped bringing what they already promised to bring. And as a result, right, we go back to Genesis, v'yikalei geshem min hashamayim. Then the heavens stopped bringing the rains. So we see, right, a connection between, like in other words, a source, so to speak. Where is this connection between people who make a pledge, publicly at least, and they don't fulfill their pledge? God forbid, this could end up cutting off the rains. And then he says another opinion, Yesh Omrim, Lefi shahanisiim heviu haman. Again, we can be confused. The word hanisiim is the princes? No, in this case it's going back to the clouds. It was the clouds that brought the man. V'hoya mizonatam mizumenet. That it brought food that was readily available, meaning you can eat it. You didn't need to cook it. You need to do anything. Lo hoya lehem shum hotza'ah. They didn't even have to pay for gas or electricity to cook. There was no expenditures whatsoever in their life while they were in the desert. Okay? I mean, I just imagine one thing when they did lulav and esrog, right? Probably Moshe had one and gave it to everybody, right? So the truth is, again, they didn't have to change their socks. They didn't have to buy toilet paper. They didn't have to change their clothes. They certainly didn't need to launder their clothes. There was nothing they needed to do there were no expenditures, right? Shum hotza'ah. There was no expenses. Misham nit ashru. And there, while in the desert, they became rich. So every day they got more and more, let's say, precious stones with the man that came from the clouds. Misham nit ashru. They became rich. Ki mamonam haya moisif tamid. That their money was constantly accumulating. V'haya biyadam kidei liknot avnei shoham. And then they had the ability in order to purchase the more expensive stones. Now, my only issue is that you have here, it was the Nisim that brought the stones, if that's what we thought, but here we're talking about all the Jews. What, do you mean the Nisim got little particles? It sounds like everybody got particles. And therefore we're reading this all wrong. It was Nisim that brought the Shoam stone, meaning the clouds. It's like, whoa, we went from blame and guilt of haughtiness to like perhaps a whole nother dimension of what was going on. But I think again what we have to do is somehow overlap them, figure out how they both jive together. At least lessons for life. We know that Hashem judges measure for measure, right? We can see it in our own lives with Hashkacha Pratit, right? Hashem talks to us through people, through situations. And it's up to us, hopefully, to clean our glasses, to pray for clarity, to be aware of what is going on in our lives and the people around us, because we're here to grow. We're here to work on our character. If we don't work on our character, what are we doing? What are we doing? So anyway, this just gives us some insight. And the truth is, just as this insight is absolutely fascinating, just on one word or one pasuk or one concept, I promise you, everything you will look at in the Torah has the same depth, right? People ask us 5 whole books, right? 5 whole parshiot that's dealing with the details of the Mishkan. And some people, like maybe even us when we were young, we would say, I'm getting bored of this already, or why is it so repetitive? Well, guess what? There is unbelievable treasures and wealth and richness that will, take you to the moon and back, in terms of your spiritual journey. And so I wish everyone, number one, to continue studying, continue learning, and Bezrat Hashem, right? Am Yisrael should be protected, and the whole world should see peace, B'ezrat Hashem, soon in our days, with the rebuilding of the temple. I'm not saying any order here, but the ingathering of the exiles, the rebuilding of the temple, and then we would know Mashiach is already here. B'ezrat Hashem, have a Shabbat Shalom, a great life, and we'll see you next week.
Yiboneh, Yiboneh, Yiboneh,